Hey, Manny, thanks for your work in week one, man. Tommy Givens here, professor of the course. Just want to send along a video reply. Gives me a chance to say hello a little more directly and give you some feedback on what you've written here in week one, which is excellent. Super good stuff here, man, in both response forums. I just want to highlight a few things that I think will serve you well if you continue to sort of marinate in them as the rest of Matthew's gospel unfolds. First of all, I love the sort of description of Jesus as this kind of light and vitality in the midst of decreation or nothingness. I think you're drawing from the martyrology of Jerome, the creative power of God, the impossibility of creation, attuning us to the darkness, nothingness, emptiness that surrounds the creative and vitalizing ministry of Jesus. This is a great take, I think, on Jesus in relation to the powers of creation. Demonic presences in Matthew, for example, target the communication organs of bodies and in that way estrange them from one another. And that's one of the ways that they're agents of decreation. So that who Jesus is, as this son heir of God's creative power through this winding genealogy across generations, is the healing power that turns the death that sets in as estrangement between human bodies, as disease, into the food of life. So it's not that Jesus just cancels death or cancels darkness or simply sort of turns off decreation. In fact, Jesus lays hold of these divisive powers, these fragmenting forces, and turns them into the food of life together, of bodies being reconciled to each other, seeing one another, hearing one another, loving each other. And so that's a great way of just getting at who Jesus is, with this sort of horizon of Genesis, helping us to focus our view on him. I also love, you said it somewhere, how, oh, yeah, the genealogy doesn't give us like a theologically abstracted view of Jesus. It really, even as it's evocative, has this poetic reach. Uh, it's not super detailed in a certain way, and yet it is concrete in the particulars that it uses to evoke the epic scope of Jesus, the names, the memories that these names and their relationships kind of summon from the memory of Israel's past and foreground for us as the frame in which the the very concrete Jesus is going to be mediated to us. So love the sort of attentiveness there to just the problems of theological abstraction. It's not that we can do without certain measures of abstraction altogether, but I think what I sense in what you're saying is that they always threaten to undermine our perception of the concreteness of Jesus, the concreteness of his saving power. And so we want to sort of guard against our tendencies of abstraction running amok and forestalling our ability to perceive Jesus as the narrative presents him to us. So love that. Um, I'm glad you highlighted sort of the ambiguity of David's reign, because I think the genealogy itself does that. You've got David the king, right? And yet he's coupled with the wife of Uriah. This is not exactly David's shining moment. It is arguably the most shameful moment of his history. In fact, I'd say that's how the Deuteronomist of the Old Testament presents his reign. And so the genealogy holds together the most abject failure of the kingdom, specifically of David, and its promise. And we want to sort of see Jesus as embracing that whole spectrum of light and darkness, as opposed to scrubbing his history of its more unsavory moments, or you might say, just in the drama of Jesus's life, gravitating only to what people idealize, uh, you might say, spurning his people's corruption and shame and sins. No, he doesn't do that. He enters into the deepest possible solidarity with his people in their corruption, whether that's in the baptism, whether it's in the way that he dies, all of the sort of intricate interactions with people. He embraces his people in all that they are. And that's key, I think, to what it means for us to follow Jesus and to learn to see and to hear the complexity of people and to be opened to all of their lives as well as our own, so as to embrace one another fully, not so that we can sort of cut out the bad and accept only the good. We want to learn how to make life out of death, not to pretend that you can make life as we have inherited it without death, without embracing the horrors and the sins of the human as something that we must face together. So great stuff here in response form two. I'm already going a little long here because you got so much good stuff, but I think love that you started the response to this impossible question of who Israel is with Israel being united by God's promises and God's love. The primacy of God's action here, I think, is right. Israel is not united by their faithfulness, by their justice, by their righteousness, by their orthodoxy, by their believing the right things. It's not that obviously any of that stuff doesn't matter, but it is always a function of God's gifts, always a response to what God is continuously doing to give life to Israel, to be bound to Israel even in its corruption, to be committed to Israel irrevocably. And that is key also to who Jesus is in Matthew's gospel. So I'm just glad you've highlighted that. Of course, that is borne out across the text that I had you read. Jeremiah perhaps is the most stunning along these lines because he combines such invective against Israel for all of its horrific disobedience and corruption, combines that with promise that God will not forsake Israel. God will not give up on the people, that God will seek them out, that God is going to make fishers and hunters of people to go find them out under the rocks in the crannies, not going to leave any of the sheep behind. You can already hear how Jesus is going to pick up on exactly some of these themes of hope in the midst of darkness and despair, as opposed to what we often get in Christian readings of Matthew and other New Testament stuff, even from Old Testament stuff, this idea that God simply disinherits the people or replaces them with some new, true, and spiritual Israel. We don't get anything like that, actually, in Scripture or in Matthew's Gospel. So, anyway, great insights here. Glad to be in conversation with you. Looking forward to more conversation in the weeks ahead.